Julie Sturza joins us today on the Communicative Leader. Julie is the lead statistician at a large, nationally renowned medical center. As a woman in the STEM field, Julie discusses her experiences and shares her insights with us. We discuss unique challenges women may face in a male-dominated field, and Julie leaves us with thoughtful advice related to mentors, supportive networks, and work-life integration. Hello and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Oh, Julie, thank you for joining us today on the Communicative Leader. I'm so excited to have you. As a woman in the STEM field and as a friend, I'm really excited to have this conversation. So before we dive into your experiences, can you give us a little bit of your background and then help us to understand kind of what inspired you to pursue that career in the STEM field?
Thank you so much, Leah, for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today. In terms of what drew me into my career, I think I knew I always wanted to do something in the field of medicine or health. Probably a lot of that had to do with my mom, who was a microbiologist and then a physician's assistant later in life. I always looked up to her and loved hearing what she brought home from work in terms of the cool topics that she was working on. So in undergrad, I was pre-med and English major, and then I went to grad school and got a master's in public health, and specifically in environmental epidemiology, which is the study of how humans are impacted on a population level and on an individual level by things that are in the water, or the air, or the food that we eat. And so after grad school, I did a fellowship at the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C., and I did a lot of work on children's environmental health there. But I also ended up working with a lot of environmental economists who really use a lot of statistics in the work that they did and reminded me how much I loved math and was missing the math part. And kind of showed me the way that biostatistics can combine math and science to really make an impact in the field of health and medicine.
Yeah, that is so neat. I love so much of what you said, Julie. And I think that, recognizing you've always had this passion and this interest in medicine and biology, and you explored that. And then also recognizing that in conversations, you're really drawn to the statistics of it. And I love, I always feel like people find their careers by leaning into what fits them best. And so that's really neat. And I love that, especially as a communication professor. I have so many students who are like, I became a comm major because I don't have to do math. And I'm like, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. We're still going to do math, right? Like, it's not going to be the same as other majors. But when you do have a good grasp on statistics and your data fluency and your ability to understand your world and to navigate it increase so much.
Right. And looking back at that point during my fellowship, I kind of looked back at my public health grad school experience and realized, oh yeah, the classes that I really excelled at were biostatistics classes. And I just never really thought, I guess I didn't really see what the career options were for that other than getting a PhD and teaching at a university or something like that. And so I feel like it was really fortuitous that I got to work with these awesome environmental economists who showed me a different way to use stat in a different field.
Yeah, that is really exciting. So then pursuing, the statistical field, what are some of the unique challenges you think that you've encountered that maybe those, I think in the majority men, maybe that they haven't experienced?
Right. I think a lot of women relate to feeling imposter syndrome. And that was definitely something that I struggled with and still struggle with today at times. I have kind of a naturally chatty, smiley personality, and I felt at times that I kind of had to tone down who I was and what my personality was in order for people to take me seriously. And luckily, I think I've mostly grown out of that as I've gotten older, because I know that this is just my personality, and it doesn't mean that I'm not good at statistics. And then the other thing that I think is a challenge, so I have 3 kids that are 10, 8, and 5. And so there was a lot of maternity leaves in a short period of time. And I think now my kids are, like I said, they're a little bit older. And so policies have really improved, I think, in terms of maternity leaves. But at the time that I was taking time off to have my babies, I just felt like an inconvenience sometimes. And whether or not people were trying to make you feel that way, there was a sense that you being off of work was inconveniencing people.
Oh, I hear you, Mama. It's so tough. I was just having a conversation with, in academia, as forward thinking as we are, there's still so many challenges, because if you have a baby in a semester, when you're teaching, what do you do about afterwards or in the continuity of delivery? So actually, that's why I have 2 May babies, because I was able to have them, luckily, after the traditional semester. And so I'm just remembering people being like, have you been thinking about this? What is this going to look like? Like, I'm like, you can't put it in order. Like, are we all familiar with how this process works?
Right.
So I fully understand that. And back to your point about imposter syndrome, that is my number 1 downloaded episode over the past 4 seasons. And I think because it's something that even once we're in, sometimes that still flares up. And be like, hey, I've been doing this for a while, but once in a while it just comes knocking on your door. And I think particularly when we look a little different than everyone around us, or most of those around us at the peer level or above us, it can be especially frequent. And saying, are you sure? Does this make sense? And you're like, I'm doing it. It's okay. But I hear you.
I think helps too with imposter syndrome is just having the maturity and the experience to know that it's okay to say, I don't really know the answer to that right now, or that's such a great question that you asked me, and I want to take a little bit of time and research that before I give you an answer. And I think that's okay to do. And I think people respect that, as opposed to you just trying to make something up on the fly, or just kind of white knuckle your way through an explanation that you don't feel confident in.
Exactly. That was one of my, it's one of those moments that you're always going to remember. I had a professor, my PhD, and we were just being pains. Like, looking back, I'm like, I would not have wanted to lead that class, but we were just peppering him with questions. And then somehow someone directly said, what if you don't know? And he's like, I'll get back to you. And that I'm like, this is an expert, and this person is internationally renowned for what he does. And that was like, wow, I never thought of that as an actual response, a valid response. And now I defer to that. So you're right. What are we going to do in lieu of that option?
Right. It's powerful to feel confident in saying, I can get back to you.
Yeah. And this is a nice segue, because I think that when we are leaning into our expertise and saying, great question, I'm going to circle back, you're definitely demonstrating leadership. And so with that in mind, you've already touched on some of these things, but Julie, what are some ways that you've used your leadership skills to kind of navigate and be successful in your career?
Yeah, I think time management and energy management are really crucial to my field of work, and probably to a lot of others. And what I mean by energy management is, if I am, banging my head on the wall trying to push through something, and I am frustrated and it's taken me way too long, way a lot longer than I thought it should take to understand that there's value in stopping and taking a step back and realizing that you can come back to it later once you've gotten your energy back up by doing something that allows you to feel more productive. And then I think communication obviously is a huge leadership skill that I think has helped me a lot. I think in the field of statistics, there's a lot of people who can do statistics and who can code and who can have the knowledge base to do statistics and biostatistics for people. But I think being able to communicate those results is a really crucial skill that I think has allowed me to do well in my job. And also understanding, so I work a lot with primarily MD and PhD physicians and people in the medical field. And I think that they're used to being experts and having all the answers. And a lot of them feel, not a lot, but some of them feel a little sheepish about the fact that they don't remember the one stats class that they had in medical school. And so understanding that not only do you need to communicate things in a way that's understandable, but that's also sensitive to the fact that this is a group of people who is not used to feeling like they don't have the answers.
Yeah. Gosh, what a thoughtful answer, Julie. Thank you. I want to raise up the idea of the value in stopping, because you're right. There's so many times like, you did not need to go down that rabbit's hole. Would have been way better for like time management and, mental health if I had just said, no, we can move this to tomorrow, or, shuffling things even a little. So thank you for bringing that up. And I want to point out the strength in your communication, because you're talking about, what I'm hearing is communication with relationships. And certainly working with experts can be really tricky. It can be a huge blessing because you're learning from people who are innovators in their field. But then you're right in trying to say, let's rethink this, or have you considered this? Take some tact. So you're really excelling in your communication with relationships, but then also with that content, that translational, right? And figuring out, yes, this is what the statistic says, but then let's explain why that's important and what that means. And oftentimes people tend to excel in one of these areas. They tend to be really good with relationships, but then that content or translational, it gets a little bit harder, or vice versa. And so I can definitely see your leadership, part of why you have so much success, that you've earned this because of your ability to communicate well across all of these boundaries.
Right. And I think too, like I was saying, with working with these physicians who are experts in their field, I think another thing that I found has been really successful for me is humbling myself in terms of my lack of medical knowledge. So when they're initially meeting with me and explaining the project that they want me to collaborate on, just being open and humble and saying, I don't understand what you're talking about, or can you step back? Why are these kids having this surgery? Or why would you think that this would improve patient outcomes? Or what is it like for a patient in your clinic who's experiencing this with you? And just, I think that kind of allows them to really shine and to show their expertise. And then it's relationship building in that way.
Yeah, so you have disclosure, you're demonstrating that you care about them and what's important to them. And I really applaud you. I am biased toward communication, but if people spent more time thinking about their communication and the impact of it, work gets easier. Your romantic relationships, your relationships with your kids, your neighbors. So thank you for what you're doing and modeling. Yeah. So, Julie, this next one, this can be a tricky, as you know, it's a buzzword. I'm thinking about work-life balance. And so I am wondering if, if you could talk to us a little bit about that work-life balance as a woman in a male-dominated field and also as a mother.
Right. So I think I actually have not found it to be as challenging as it could be in other fields because I do statistics primarily for pediatricians who like kids and
Mhm.
understand kids and parental relationships. And also, there just tends to be a lot of women in the field of pediatrics.
Mhm.
And so, in that way, I feel understood and just like people share my expectations about
Mhm.
what's important. Um, and then I also early on in my career just found mentors or more senior people who had habits or work life balance skills that I
Mhm.
kind of copied. One of my bosses early on, I noticed that she left every day at 3 o'clock. And I asked her about it. And she said, well, yeah, my kids need to get picked up from school. And so I leave at 3 o'clock. And that means that I start work at 7 o'clock.
Mhm.
And that's what works for me and my family. And it was such a light bulb moment for me because I was like, oh, you don't have to work 9 to 5. And
Mhm.
this is a very respected senior person, and she leaves work at 3 o'clock, and everybody just accepts that that's what's
Mhm.
important to her. And so that's something that I have tried to emulate, and it's really worked well for our family is
Mhm.
having flexible hours. And if there's a thing that I need to leave for, then I leave for it. And
Yep.
and she also encouraged me to don't just say I need to pick up my kids. I need to leave this
Yep.
meeting right at 3 o'clock. Don't try to hide what you're doing or say it's for an appointment or something. Just be honest because
Mhm.
that's the only way that things are going to improve for everybody is if we're just honest that
Mhm.
kids need us, families need us sometimes outside
Mhm.
of traditional or during traditional working hours.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I love that, the strength of the modeling and recognizing that this isn't something that necessarily we learn overnight. We can go to different resources, we can have conversations, we can find books, but we can also look around us, like you said, and looking at people who we respect, who we admire, who have earned a level of designation in the organization. And be like, wow, okay, she's doing this. And I love that you asked about that too. Like, hey, what goes on at 3 o'clock? And I know before you had kids, I would never have thought of leaving at 3, but yeah, I like you, a hard stop at 3, and um, there's will be sad little people waiting.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so thank you for bringing it up, and thank you again for modeling that as well for others. And I think, as you said, the more that we can have conversations about it and normalize it, the easier it is for organizations, for their leaders to also make that more normative and make that part of the culture rather than an exception or a one-off.
Right. Right.
And so my next question, and this is kind of a follow-up, you've kind of addressed this in thinking about the previous question, but how do you approach advocating either for yourself or if you've had other women in your organization or the field that you have advocated for? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is kind of paying it forward and explaining to them when I started this job and when I started having kids, this was the understanding and the grace that was shown to me by women who I reported to, and I'm going to show that same understanding and grace to you. And if you need to take your kid to the doctor, don't think twice about it.
Mhm.
And just um, being really upfront
Mhm.
about saying these things so that someone who might um, report to me doesn't feel awkward or uncomfortable asking for time off for something that's family related. And then also, I've also when I've managed women in the past and men for that matter too, um, kind of going to meetings with them and kind of sticking up for them and encouraging and showing them the way to say, that's really not in her scope of work for this
Mm-hmm.
project, and kind of using my authority to kind of give them an out or to
Mm-hmm.
explain something that they might not feel comfortable doing themselves. Um, and then also, you and I have this in common for younger girls. We both
Mm-hmm.
coach Science Olympiad, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I love doing for my kids, just
Mm-hmm.
showing them that women love science and women can be good at science, and that's been a really rewarding experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'm just laughing at my science Olympiad. My knowledge is growing at the same pace as my daughters and her friends. But you're right. Just showing up and being there, I think, is a powerful lesson. And one thing you were mentioning in your response that I really liked was when we think about formal leadership, a lot of people, again, either or, they tend to really lean into that authority. So, as your manager, nope, that's outside of the scope of the work, but you're also bringing in the influence. So some will try just through relationships and hoping that modeling is helpful, and that certainly can, but the strongest titled leaders are the ones that blend that authority with their influence. And that's such a powerful thing for you to be modeling for others and helping them then. It's one thing to watch you do it and then know, oh, okay, she's helping me to figure out how to stand up for myself or how to say no in a polite way, which is a lot easier way for me personally to learn it than being like, hey, Leah, listen, this is what I'd like to see you do, or you've been struggling with this. Can you do that? So I think we're also really mindful of people's learning styles and their ability to save face in professional settings when you do it that way. So really neat to be hearing that. So with this next one, I'm thinking about, this is an opinion based question. And I'm just wondering what you have seen or what you would recommend in terms of attracting and retaining more women in STEM fields.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it would be the same answer for both men and women, which is
Mm-hmm.
just creating more family friendly policies, greater work life balance, just trusting and empowering people to work in a way that allows them to get their work done, but also fits into their life and their lifestyle and their family
Mm-hmm.
demands. Whether that's working from home or working non-traditional hours. And like I said, I think, like I mentioned earlier, with expanded parental leave and stuff like that, I feel like it's it's good in a way that some of the cultural shifts are supportive of both men and women in the
Mm-hmm.
same way. But I think women especially can benefit from greater work life balance and flexible
Mm-hmm.
hours and things like that.
Yeah, and that's one thing. One of the benefits that came out of the pandemic that we still see many organizations, I know that some of them, fortunately, are leaning back into that antiquated, you need to be here in these hours, you need to have your butt in the seat here where we can see you. But I still think overall, what I'm seeing is the trend is at least to hybrid approaches. And things like that can really make a big difference in being able to show up, to do my work, to do it well, but to also feel like I'm showing up at home. Is these responsibilities, they just shift for us depending on where we are and what time it is. They don't, never are we alleviated of these needs and requests of our time.
Right. And I think a lot of that too is just understanding people's different personalities. And for example, there's someone I work with who reports to me who's pretty introverted and also has a pretty long commute. And so for that person, it makes total sense to mostly work from home because for, a very, and I'm not saying this person is specifically, but for very introverted people, being in an
Mm-hmm.
office setting can be really exhausting and
Yeah.
draining. And just kind of understanding, even if that's not, I'm a very extroverted person.
Mm-hmm.
So being in the office works well for me,
Mm-hmm.
but understanding that not everybody feels the same way.
Mm-hmm. And that's a gift too, because I think so often we assume others are similar. If you remember, some of my best advice when I first became a brand new assistant professor, my chair reminded me, you're not teaching, 30 Leahs. These are all different students and they have all different motives and approaches, and that was really helpful in recognizing that, okay, I can't hold those expectations for all of them that I would for myself. So,
Right. And not to
yeah.
feel offended when someone's response is not what your response would be, because they're just a different person with a different
Yeah,
personality.
yeah, right. Because I have some who are so happy with the D, and I just like I would still be fretting about a D even at this point, right? So, like you said, all different expectations. So another question, and this is when you are experienced, you're in a leadership role. So with this in mind, how have you seen the landscape for women in STEM change over the course of your career?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is that, when I was younger, there was a real push to get elementary school girls interested in STEM
Mhm.
topics. And maybe the assumption was that was enough. And I think that there's been maybe a greater push to support those young girls that we get into STEM fields throughout
Mhm.
middle school, high school, college, and beyond. And just the importance of creating women only spaces where there can
Mhm.
be discussions about their field or the work life balance, etc. But yeah, so I think that it's become more holistic in terms of supporting women throughout the the career life cycle, not just when they're cute
Yeah.
6-year-olds.
Yes. 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 Yeah. I even had some colleagues in communication who would look at media, children's media, and for a long time there were no female characters associated with anything related to STEM. So they're saying, because I had a colleague who had a baby girl, that was her first, and she's like, we're showing her these shows and there's no one that looks like her that can do math or that is an engineer or doing anything in technology. Um, so I think we've started to look at it, as you said, and there was that big focus that by fifth grade, if you're not in this, then you're done, right? It was kind of this, I kind of felt like this insurmountable obstacle that if you weren't engaged in STEM by then, as a young girl, it was never going to happen for you. And as you're pointing out, I think you're right. There are more opportunities and conversations now. And I know a lot of research that's being done to figure out how do we keep this momentum going, right? So my next question, Julie, and this is one you've already hit on quite a bit, but I'm wondering if we have maybe someone who is just graduating or someone who's just switched over into a STEM-based field. Can you kind of speak to either finding a mentor or thinking about how to build a supportive network?
So mentorship's been really important for me, and I have kind of different types of mentors. So I'm thinking of two specific mentors who I consider technical mentors,
Mm-hmm.
who are people that I can ask very specific statistics questions to. I can send them code that I've written and ask them to read it and see if it is doing what I think it's doing, or if I need to make any
Mm-hmm.
tweaks to it. Um, and those mentors are really important in terms of having confidence in my technical skills in those situations where I'm kind of stretching to something that I haven't done before or is new to me. Um, and then I kind of have, I don't know what I would call them, um, maybe like lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
type mentors who are maybe people who aren't doing the exact same job as me, but people who I look to emulate their work-life balance
Mm.
or their leadership skills or how they act in meetings, how they come across in emails, those types of things. And I think it's been good for me to have both types of mentors and understand that different people can serve as a mentor to you in different ways. And no one person, no one
Mhm.
mentor is going to have everything. So
Mhm.
it's in
Ex
your best interest to kind of try to find a combination of mentors.
Bingo. And it's funny, I don't know if you know this literature, but that's exactly how we think about mentoring is the career focused, like that technical side, and then the social emotional side. Because sometimes if career's going really well, there might be things at home that's like, gosh, we've got a new schedule at school and I'm really having a challenge. I'm not able to get into my cadence. And like you said, there are other times it's like, this is a new project. Am I okay, I need a quick check-in. And so yes, I think that's really, really important that you're thinking about that from all of these different vantage points where we might need someone to come in and kind of shore up our confidence or shore up our technical ability to say like, yep, you're on the right track.
Yeah, and just what you were saying now reminded me too of, I guess I would call like another class of mentors maybe a peer mentor,
Mhm.
who is someone that you can sit down and talk to for 10 minutes and say, I'm in this situation where someone's asking this of me, and I know you do similar things in similar
Mhm.
type of situations. How do you handle it when X, Y, and Z happens and you're not sure how to respond? And those I don't even know. I mean, it feels weird to call it peer mentor. I don't know what you would call it, but just someone
Mhm.
who does have a really similar position as you and who can relate to you on specific things related to your job.
Yeah, I think like that social support, right? And I think you're right. You can ask them, what would you do here? Or can I pick your brain? And they're really good also for just a quick rant to be like,
Yes.
I need 5 minutes to complain about this. And you don't need to give them a backstory because they know, they understand it. And a lot of times that's all you need to then to be able to go forward in a productive way.
Yes, totally. I had a recent example where someone that I was collaborating with on a project said something that as a statistical collaborator I found very offensive, but I was finding myself explaining it to my husband or to a friend,
Mhm.
and they were like, I don't get why that was so upsetting to you.
Mhm.
And then finally, like a coworker
Mhm.
and I caught up last week and I said it, and he was like, I can't believe
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, outrage. You're like, thank you. I am validated.
Finally, I found the outrage that I needed.
Yeah, exactly. So, Julie, I have two final questions for you, and these go hand in hand. So, I end every episode of the Communicative Leader with these pragmatic leadership or communication. It can be a tip, it can be advice, it can be a challenge. So, the first part of the question, what advice do you want to leave our titled leaders with?
Yeah, I would say connections are so important. I think we touched on this already, but showing the people that you work with that you care about them
Mhm.
more, or you view them as more than just a person who can give you the thing that you're asking for. You view them as a whole person who has a personality and who has a life outside of
Mhm.
work. And I know personally that the people that have shown me those type of connections that were leaders above me, I find myself just naturally wanting to go above and beyond for those people
Mhm.
because I so appreciate that they took the time to ask me questions about my family or
Mhm.
my life or vacations that I went on, and just show me that I wasn't just a person who was there to do statistics and hand them over to them. So that would be something that I think is really important, is just building connections.
Yeah. And I think too, if we spend so much time at work, whether it is hybrid or virtual or in the office, and taking the time to model that, especially our titled leaders, like you're saying, then that becomes more of a norm and an expectation for others rather than just one kind person who is thoughtful. And I think too, considering the amount of time and energy we give to our organizations, to our peers, to our stakeholders, then, that's an organization I want to be a part of. That's an organization that feels better for me. And I imagine a lot of others feel like, yep. Yeah. And so last question. So we've just thought about advice for our titled leaders. Now, what do you want to leave our employees, all ranks across all industries? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so this is something that's like very practical and specific, which is to always ask for deadlines and then clarify the nature of the deadline. By that, I mean, is it like a drop dead must be done at this time? Is there some flexibility? Because so often, and I'm guilty of it too, you shoot someone an email and say, hey, can you do this for me? Yep. And there's this big unknown of, can you do this for me right this second, right this week, in 6 months? And so I think before sending an email where you're asking someone to do something, just put a timeline in and then say, this can be flexible, as long as it's any time within 2 weeks of this deadline, or say, I really need this and this, because there's a deadline I'm then trying to meet. And then if you're on the receiving end of a request, I always push, like immediately respond and say, sure, I can do this for you. What is your timeline? Because I've found that sometimes you're really like busting your butt trying to meet some deadline that is not actually really that important. And it's just makes everything more stressful than it really needs to be.
Yeah, that is such a helpful piece of advice. And it's the first time I've heard that, right? Which I really love. And it's so important. And it doesn't matter if you're in a project-based role, a customer service, whatever it is, the knowledge or product that you're bringing to the table, someone is going to be asking you for information or some type of output. So thinking ahead of time, sure, I was smiling when you're saying that. I'm like, yeah, there have definitely been times that I have like acted like a maniac trying to get something done and realizing like, oh, this deadline's 6 weeks out. Why am I doing this? Like, why have I done this? Because I didn't stop to ask for clarification. And I know, especially on the receiving end, I'm sure there have been students who've been like, Dr. O, you just gave me a mild heart attack. You didn't need this until then. And so thinking about that both as sending and receiving. So that's really a thoughtful point to leave us with. So.
Yeah, because even when when you're sending a request to someone, whether or not you are fully conscious of it, you have an expectation of when you want it done. And so you'll sit there stressing over the fact that this person hasn't returned your email or hasn't given you what you need. And then you realize, oh, well, that's because they have no idea that I needed it when I needed it. So.
Yep. And I love that. And I think it's those specific actions that really add up to make work life so much more manageable.
Right.
And that's what we're all looking for. Just a little bit of cushion, just a little bit of padding. So, Julie, thank you for joining us today. I have truly enjoyed our conversation. I've learned a lot from you, and I know our listeners will as well.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.